The found footage subgenre gets a bad rap. It became an easy target for critics thanks to its re-rise in popularity in the 2010s, but it's always been a genre that I've personally loved. Despite being the found footage stan that I am, though, I can agree that there have been way more bad ones than good ones, and it can be easy to get lost in the garbage heap of cheap, low-budget schlock. Consequently then, you should absolutely not make the same mistakes I did and avoid all of the following flicks at all cost. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 found footage movies you should die before you see. Number 8. Paranormal Activity 4. The franchise that really launched the found footage format to renewed mainstream interest, there's still a lot to like about the Paranormal Activity movies. But sadly, Paranormal Activity 4 is a classic case of diminishing returns. Despite being billed as a true sequel to the second film, this installment brings very little new to the table, and the old bag of tricks are truly stale by this point. Though the series is very much of its time generally, this is the one that feels the most dated. Hell, an entire set piece centers around the Xbox Kinect motion sensor. That's the kind of gimmick territory we're in here, using a peripheral that even its own creators have disowned in the years following the film's release. But it's difficult to muster up any kind of passion for this 4th installment. The kindest thing I can say is that it's not the silliest film in the franchise. That title belongs to the Ghost Dimension, but even that movie being silly and daft and even kind of doing away with a lot of the regular found footage trappings makes it a bit more interesting than this one, which is just so aggressively mundane. Number 7. Grave Encounters 2. Grave Encounters 1 was a genuinely pleasant surprise. Grave Encounters 2, however, is exactly the hack job everyone expected Grave Encounters 1 to be. It's all pretty trite stuff, so if you go into it expecting to see night vision footage, victims being dragged off screen, and big dumb characters swinging the camera around while shouting, "What the hell was that?" then you're in the right place. For even more bad measure, the filmmakers also throw in creepy kids, phones that don't work, and a body on a gurney that isn't really dead. It's pretty much a found footage themed game of bingo, or a drinking game, or something like that. Maybe you could enjoy it if you made it into a drinking game. It also doesn't help that our hero/villain also has emo Peter Parker and Spider-Man 3 vibes as well, which isn't really what you want when you're making a horror movie that's supposed to be terrifying. Number 6. Documenting the Grey Man. Made for $32,000 by first-time writer-director Wayne Capps, Documenting the Grey Man initially gets into your good graces by having its protagonists be a film crew who discuss the ease with which footage can be faked to make convincing, shareable, real-world horror movies. It's not a totally original premise. I mean, something similar acts as the basis of the recent Ghost stories, but it's a cool setup nonetheless. Tragically, the movie coasts on that goodwill it earns in the first 5 minutes until it's time to actually deliver on the inventiveness that the premise suggests. Once the scares do start coming, the movie devolves into the usual cliches, made worse by some hawky acting that undermines the threat and mystery of the script. Linking the monster to real-world disasters could have elevated the scale and threat of the whole piece, but instead we just get the usual women being dragged out of frame, the cameraman going down, and ultimately a regular old haunting. Number 5. A Night in the Woods. If you're the kind of viewer that takes a big, deep sigh whenever a group of interchangeable characters decide to film their excursion into the middle of nowhere, you won't be enamored by the story of Kerry, her boyfriend Brody, or her creepy ex Leo. This trio are hiking in the northwest of England, admittedly a cool setting for a potentially spooky movie, but sadly they just spend most of their time bickering, leaving us wondering if this is a movie at all or just an amateur video documenting a bizarre love triangle. The main issue though is that the film commits the biggest found footage sin. That is, making the audience sit through over an hour of grueling, unconvincing character drama and setup before delivering on 15 minutes of scares. When events finally take a turn for the sinister, it's been such a stamina-draining slog that it's tough to care about anyone on screen, which is a shame because these scares themselves aren't the worst things in the world. It's a cliched but decently executed Blair Witch-esque finale, but the issue is you can get that in so many other found footage horror movies, and ones that don't have so much boring preamble. Number 4. The Gallows. The Gallows is one of those movies that's acutely annoying because it squanders what could have been a genuinely great premise. When we were younger, I think we all wondered what it would be like to be trapped in our schools at night. With no teachers or adults around, the usually cluttered and vibrant hallways and classrooms take on a mysterious and weirdly eerie air. On top of this, the setup for the actual plot outside the setting is cool as well. In 1993, a student dies in a hanging stunt gone gone wrong during the production of a play called The Gallows, and 20 years later, the school attempts to put on the play to mark the anniversary of the accident. I mean, it's a bold strategy, Cotton, so let's see if it pays off for them. Spoilers, it does not, and a villain wielding a noose starts hanging up our cast of teens one by one. Now, I know right about now you might be thinking that this all actually sounds quite promising, but I can't be stressed enough just how passionless the rest of the film plays out, going through the motions of characters running around, the camera shaking all over the place, and the kills being executed as boringly as possible. It takes itself so seriously as well, and clearly wants to become a big franchise, but the groundwork just isn't there. Number 3, A Haunted House 2. So far, any comedy on this list has been wholly unintentional, but A Haunted House 2 is one of the few notable quote-unquote found footage comedies, the other being, A Haunted House 1. And to be fair, a spoof of this genre should be easy game. Like I said in the intro, I love it, but I can acknowledge that there's so much there to take the out of. So many tropes and pitfalls that are primed to be turned into comedy. A Haunted House cost $2.5 million and made $60 million worldwide though, so despite a barrage of negative reviews, economic sense dictated that co-writer/star Marlon Wayans would sooner or later return to a sequel. It was inevitable, just like it was also inevitable that the sequel was going to be similarly as bad. A Haunted House 2 though, even more so than the original, is so soulless and surface level with its observations that it feels like the creators only ever saw the trailers of the flicks that they're supposedly parodying. To his credit, admittedly, Wayans does tone down the homophobic humor this time around, but he also makes up for it with a streak of animal cruelty gags and, for good measure, throws in a running joke about having sex with the doll from Annabelle. Cool. Number 2, 8213 Gacy House. You knew the Asylum had to feature on this list at one point. The production company, known primarily for its low-budget knockoffs of popular horror movies, of course cashed in on the found footage trend. Multiple times, in fact, but today we're focusing on 8213 Gacy House, aka Paranormal Entity 2. If you haven't seen the first Paranormal Entity, then don't worry, you're not missing out on much, and you can probably already guess the setup. A bunch of people go to a house, set up some cameras, and record increasingly violent ghost sightings. The twist in this second movie, though, is that it's not any old poltergeist moving bits of furniture and letting in a draft by opening and closing doors. It's actually the ghost of infamous serial killer John Wayne Gacy. In real life, Gacy was a killer who dressed up as a clown and murdered more than 33 people, something which this mockbuster shamefully plays up and exploits for some cheap scares. Sometimes the Asylum's trash can be so bad it's good, but this one is just wholesale bad. Number 1, The Asylum Tapes. It's no secret that Hollywood and nepotism go hand in hand. If you have a successful director, writer, or actor, there's a good chance that their children will eventually make their way into the business in one form or another. However, that doesn't mean that anyone related to a popular industry name is a talentless hack getting by on name value alone. The world had high hopes when Sean Stone, son of legend Oliver Stone, tried his hand at directing a horror movie. Sadly, the result was The Asylum Tapes, or Greystone Park depending on what territory you're in, which is what the poets call not a good movie. Again though, it's another one that did have a good premise, initially starting out as a fake documentary with Oliver and Sean Stone playing versions of themselves. It's clearly a passion project, but that meta framing ultimately results in a bland by-the-numbers ghost story that is only really notable today because of the names attached to it. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Have you seen any of these terrible found footage horror movies, and are there any awful ones that you think deserve a spot on this list? Either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head back to What Culture Horror for more lists and news like this on the regular. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.